recorded. Please silence your cell phones. Just a reminder, we don't want it ringing in the middle of the event. We will be doing a signing after the Q&A, so if you'd like to get your book signed, please line up by the microphone or by the pillar over here. And please have your books ready for personalization if you want them. And lastly, once the event is complete, we ask that you fold up your chairs and lean them against something sturdy to help us out a bit. All right, now into the main event. I am honored to introduce Andrew McCarthy to all of you. Andrew is the author of 3 books, Brat, an 80s story, Just Fly Away, and The Longest Way Home, all New York Times bestsellers. He is an award-winning travel writer and served for 12 years as an editor-at-large at Nat Geo, Traveler magazine. He is also known as an actor for the past 4 decades. He has appeared in such iconic films as Pretty in Pink and Less Than Zero. And tonight, he will be talking about his new book, Walking with Sam, a father, a son, and 500 miles across Spain. In this candid and heartwarming travel memoir, Andrew recounts the 500-mile journey that he and Sam, his son, took across Spain's Camino de Santiago. Booklist, in their review of the book, writes that McCarthy's depiction of the rewarding endeavor of walking the Camino with his son is both worthwhile and entertaining. So everyone, let us all welcome Andrew McCarthy.
Hi, guys. Hi. Thanks for coming out. Can you hear me? Great. Thank you. Yeah, there's nothing if you don't come. So thank you very much. I did an event in San Francisco some years ago, and 3 people came. And 2 of them, bless them, were homeless getting out of the rain. So I'm really glad that you showed up. So thank you. Great. It's nice to be back here in D.C. in Politics and Prose. I was here a number of years ago for another a book. So, yeah, tonight we'll talk about anything you like. We can talk about Molly. That's good. And we'll start off, though, talking about this book, Walking with Sam, a father, a son, and 500 miles across Spain. This is a book about walking the Camino de Santiago with my son, my eldest son, when he was 19 years old. And we should probably do a little housekeeping. How many people here, who here has walked the Camino? Let me start there. Oh, look at that. Well, then you can just look at your phones for a few minutes while I describe. The Camino is this ancient pilgrimage route across the north of Spain that began in the 9th century for it's 500 miles about, when in the 9th century the Catholic Church decreed that the bones of the Apostle James had been found in the farther and westernmost reach of the Iberian Peninsula, and anyone who marched across Spain to this site would get half their time in purgatory knocked off, which, you know, that's a good deal, right? But really what it might have been more about was real estate, because at that time Islam had taken over Spain and the Catholic Church wanted it back. So they said, as you're marching across Spain to get your almighty soul purged and cleansed, kick out those damn Moors. And this is when the beginning of the Crusades and the Knights Templar and all this gory, bloody, wonderful history. And it worked because the church got Spain back. And it's been that way ever since. And so the Camino sort of fell out of favor. Once Spain was safely back in Catholic hands, the Camino fell out of favor for centuries until this mid-20th century when a single priest kind of took it upon himself to bring the Camino back. And he did, to a large degree. And now it's incredibly popular again now. And I first walked the Camino back in the early mid-90s. I was in a store, much like this, when I was in Rizzoli's bookstore on West Broadway. I'm an actor, right? So that means I'm unemployed most of the time. So I was just hanging around the bookstore, and I was at the new arrivals table, and I picked up a book by a fellow named Jack Hitt called Off the Road. And I always mention Jack Hitt and his book because his book changed my life. And books change lives. And so I just think that's always worth acknowledging, particularly in a bookstore. And so I picked up the book, and I had no interest in this. That history I told you about didn't interest me at all. But there was something in his story that I found mesmerizing. I said, I'm doing that. I'm going to go do that. And I didn't, again, this is early 90s, and the only one on the internet was Al Gore, right? So there was no way to find out any information about this. So I called up the author. In the back of the book, it said that he wrote for Harper's Magazine, so I called Harper's Magazine up. And I said, I'd like to talk to Jack Hitt. They went, one moment. Hi, Jack Hitt. I'm like, oh, hey, Jack, you don't know me, but I read your book. And he was like, you read my book? I mean, he was thrilled. I know the feeling. So anyway, Jack, I said, how do you do this? What do you do? And he said, basically, you just go. You just go. You don't really need to do anything. You need no directional sense to get yourself across Spain on the Camino. There are little yellow arrows that are painted on rocks and trees and roads all the way across the entire 500 miles. So it's very difficult to get lost, although I did a number of times. But anyway, so I walked across this. I started walking across Spain. I was very excited about it, and I hated it. It was awful. One day was worse than the next. And after 3 days, I had to stop for a week in Pamplona to let my blisters heal, because on the way to the airport, I'd bought these heavy leather hiking boots. And everyone knows you need to break in heavy leather hiking boots, but I thought this somehow didn't apply to me. So anyhow, my walk was miserable. I hated it. And then about halfway into the walk in Spain, there's a thing called the High Meseta, which is a high plain of wheat fields for days. It's like 4 or 5 days of just wheat fields to the horizon. And you walk to the horizon, and you get there, and there's more wheat to the horizon. And this goes on. And Don Quixote was in the southern Meseta, and there's no wonder he was sort of tilting at windmills, right? I mean, people go crazy a little bit there. So anyway, I was walking through the Meseta one day alone, and I found myself on my knees, sobbing, and I was screaming up at whatever God I half believed in. And I had a major tantrum alone in this field of wheat, 27, 28 years ago now. And as my tears subsided, I began to realize how awake I felt. I could suddenly see really crisp colors and hear like birds call and respond. I felt very awake. And this realization started to dawn up inside of me. And it felt like it was coming across the horizon toward me, that I felt suddenly liberated from fear. And don't worry, it's not going to turn into an Oprah thing. But I was never aware of fear's presence in my life until that moment of its first absence. I felt like, my wife is Irish. She has all these good Irish sayings. One of them is, I felt like myself from the toes up. And sitting there in the field of wheat, having just sobbed my heart out, I suddenly felt like myself from the toes up. I felt like me, the way I'd always knew I could feel, and yet somehow never did. And I'd only felt like that once before. I was 15 years old. I had been cut from the high school basketball team. My mother said, Andrew, dear, why don't you try out for the school play? And I said, I don't want to be in the play. I want to be the point guard. And anyway, I tried out for the play, and I was cast as the Artful Dodger in Oliver. And since none of you were there, I can tell you that I was absolutely brilliant. And I was, because I had that feeling. I walked out on stage, and suddenly Tennessee Williams, the great playwright, has a line that says, a room, talking about love, he said, it was as if a room that had always been half in shadow was suddenly in full light. And that's how I felt about myself the second I walked on stage at 15 years old. And I knew in that instant, I go, that's what I'm doing. And I knew it was important to me because I told no one. You know, it was mine. It was this little flicker of a flame that had been lit, and anybody could have walked by and just kind of gone and smacked it out. And so I told no one until it took enough root till I didn't care what anybody said. That's what I was going to do. And I had the wonderful thing of naivete of youth, of not knowing that it's absolutely impossible. So I just went toward that. And I was lucky enough that that's what happened to me. So anyway, I felt like that again in the field of wheat. Cut to 25 years later, and my son is now 19 years old, and I'm much older, and he was about to embark upon his life, as our kids do. And I should say that when I was a kid, I left home at 17, and my relationship with my dad, in essence, ended right there. I saw him maybe a dozen times for the rest of his life over the next ensuing decades. Until he was dying, I went to him as he was dying, and we reconciled. And that was a beautiful thing. You know, we didn't solve our past, we just dropped it. And there was, you know, a love that remained there that was quite meaningful to me. And so I'm free in a certain way to love my dad in a way I never was able to during his life. So, but anyway, I didn't want that to happen with my kids. Of all the things, I just didn't want to lose my kids. I wanted to have I've always said if my kids, as they're adults, want to have an ongoing relationship with me as two adults, then my life will have been a success. And so, but my son was 19, as I said, and he was off doing what 19-year-olds do, and then he got a girlfriend, and then he was really gone. And I suddenly had this notion of like, oh my God, is Sam gone already? Did it happen? I mean, if I missed... And then, as fate would have it, his girlfriend dumped him. And being a good parent, I took this as an opportunity, and I pounced. And I walked into the room where he was moping, and I said, hey, Sammy, you want to walk the Camino? And he'd heard me brag about it for years, how life-changing it was, and to absolve me of, fear, all this stuff, dad stuff. And he looked up and he went, yeah, sure. I'm like, yeah? Yeah, whatever. At that moment, I walked into the other room, I bought 2 plane tickets, and 2 days later, we were walking in Spain. And because I knew if I'd given him a chance, he would change his mind, right? And so we began to walk. And on day 2, he said to me, Dad, what's the point of this fucking walk? And now, and to ruin the book now, so you won't have to read it, although it's about the journey, so you're still going to have to read it. On the last day, he said to me, Dad, that's the only 10 out of 10 thing I've ever done in my life. So, yeah, right? No, and so, but the goal was really, I wanted to be able to see my son. Sam said at one point, I think I put it in the book, he said it takes a long time for kids to ever, if ever, to see their parents as real people. And I thought, well, the inverse is probably equally as true. And my goal for the walk was to try and see him and let him see me, and by that, I mean, that's always been a big deal in my life, or it's become a big deal in my life, this notion of see me. I just went to Taylor Swift the other night with my daughter, which was absolutely fabulous, and I have to tell you, she was incredible. And what I was going, what is it about this? And these girls, mostly girls, teenage girls, were just so devoted. And I realized about halfway through what it is and I asked my daughter, I said, what is it about it? She goes, well, she has a song for every emotion. Everything I've been through, she's written a song about. And I went, oh, she sees them. And they feel seen by her. And that connection is really potent, And watching all those kids that night, the love, the gratitude on their, it was amazing. So this notion of being seen is a big deal to me because when I was a young actor-type fella, I was branded as in something called the Brat Pack, which many of you are aware, which is why you're here. And and over the decades and centuries, that's become this wonderfully iconic, affectionate term for a moment in pop culture that we look back on with these rose-colored glasses with great affection. People come up to me, people like many of you come up to me and they go, oh, Pretty in Pink, oh my God. And then you start talking, and then I realize your eyes glaze over and they're gone. And I realize that they're not talking to me anymore. They're talking to themselves and yourselves in your own youth. Because there's no more potent time in life than when we're not in 18, 19, 17, 20, when we're just cusping into the world and we're just coming into ourselves and our life is a blank slate to be written upon, and it's just like, get out of the way, world, I'm coming in here. It's my turn. And that's a wondrous feeling, and it's an exciting thing, and it can feel very alone and stuff at times. And I have come to realize that I and other members of the Brat Pack are like avatars for your youth. And so you look at me and you see yourself in that. And that's a beautiful thing. I kind of discovered all this or uncovered all this just recently when I wrote a book about my time in the Brat Pack several years ago. And I'd never really, it was something I ran from, and so I'd never really looked at it. And in writing about it, I just, what's the Joan Didion line? I'm misquoting, but, I write to find out what I'm thinking. It's sort of, I discovered what I felt about this by writing about it, and I come to realize it's a beautiful thing that I represent that to a certain generation or a demographic of a certain generation. But it wasn't ever thus. Back when it came out, not that I remember, but it was June 10th, 1985, New York Magazine published an article on the cover story called Hollywood's Brat Pack. And it was a scathing indictment of these young up-and-coming actors. It was supposed to be an article about an actor named Emilio Estevez, but the writer sort of followed him around for a while Emilio took him out and stuff, and I think the writer took a dislike to Emilio or felt competitive with him because he was young also. Anyway, he came up with this term Brat Pack, and he wrote this really nasty article about all these young people. And it's interesting in our world that we live in now with all this constant media all over the place that it was one magazine article that came out for 1 week in a regional magazine, and within days the entire country was talking about something called the Brat Pack. Because back then it was a very unified youth culture. Whereas now everything is so disparate. But back then, if you were a teenage kid, every Monday morning you talked about what movie was playing on Friday night. Every day. Every kid. That's what was talked about. And, you know, it was a moment, a seismic moment, a shift in popular culture, because before the early mid-'80s, we forget this now, but movies were not for kids before the early 80s. They were an adult entertainment, you know, the auteurs and all these, the 70s, and, you know, and movies were adult entertainment until in the early 80s, a couple movies like Animal House and Endless Love, and these movies started, Hollywood started to realize, oh, kids go to movies 5, 6, 7 times. Grown-ups go once. Let's make movies for kids. And so they did. And I and other members of the Brat Pack were in the right place at the right time, because then along came someone named John Hughes, who suddenly took you young people seriously and your emotions seriously, because anyone at 17, you are the first one to have ever been in love, ever. And you're your heartache is the biggest heartache that has ever been experienced by anyone ever. And that's the way it feels. And John Hughes knew that, and so he bore right in on that and respected young people. And anyway, so that all happened, and then this article comes out calling all of us young people who are having this wondrous experience, feeling unbelievably lucky, and oh my gosh, my life is starting, this is incredible, and then suddenly this article comes out, and it feels like my career and life, I'd lost control of the narrative of my career overnight by being labeled in the Brat Pack. And it proved to be true. I always joke that, well, Martin Scorsese's not going to call up somebody in the Brat Pack, right? And he never has, by the way. So, so I felt for that time, for so much time after, and one of the paradoxes is everybody would see me and go, oh my God, it's incredible. But I felt, as did other members of the Brat Pack, incredibly unseen suddenly. We would have been branded and cast in this kind of thing, and that's what we were. And so I hated it, and every other member of the Brat Pack hated that label, which I know people go, no, we love the Brat Pack, to a certain, but we did. So I felt very much unseen by that for decades, until I kind of, like I said, wrote this book and kind of realized it's better actually that you see yourself in me than you see me. You know what I mean? That is actually a great gift that I give and get by that. I am the sort of conduit for that. So the notion of being seen was really important to me. It has grown to be, over the years, is something I think just, I think it's embedded deep in all of us, we all just want to be seen. See me, see who I am. And so I think that gets us into all sorts of trouble than when we don't see each other and we just see what we want to see in someone else. Anyhow, I digress. I'm in a political city, so, you know. But anyway, so this notion of being seen. So, and that's what was my goal for our trip. And I'm a travel writer in my other life, so I'm taking notes as we're going along the way, just kind of because you never go anywhere. Once you're a travel writer, you know, you're sunk. You're always going to be writing notes about. So I was keeping little moleskin books and taking little notes along the way. And then about halfway into the trip, so the Camino walks about 500 miles to go to Camino de Santiago de Compostela. And beyond that, and that's about 50 miles from the sea, but beyond that is the ocean, a place called Finisterre, about a 3 days walk beyond Santiago. And many pilgrims feel the urge to walk beyond Santiago to go to the sea. I never did. I was like, I'm making it Santiago and I am sitting down. That's where the pilgrimage ends, and that's what I'm doing. But my son, when he learned about Finisterre, he said, I'm going to go to Finisterre, Dad. And in that instant, being the little travel writer I am, I just went, bing, good idea, Sam. Because the notion that, and the Camino is nothing if not fraught with metaphor. Every step of the way you take on the Camino, it's some metaphor for your own life, and it just is. It's one of the wondrous things. Walking, you know, walking is the natural rhythm to which we process, and mentally, emotionally, and there's a directness of communication that begins to emerge on the Camino between whoever you're with and in strangers that you meet along the way. Anyway, so my son said, I'm going to go to Finisterre, and I said, fantastic. because the idea that my son was going to go beyond my accomplishments, and I think that's super hardwired into every parent, that our child goes beyond our accomplishments. They're the first to go to college in the family. They're the first to become a doctor or a lawyer, whatever it is. And so the idea that my son metaphorically was going to go beyond my accomplishment and go to the sea, I just thought that low-hanging fruit of that metaphor was too much to resist. So I said, oh, I've got a book there. To which I said to Sammy, I said, after a couple days of thinking about this, I said, Sammy, I was thinking of writing a book about our trip. What do you think of that? And he said, do I have to write any of it? I'm like, no. Because then I don't care. That's fine. So, and so that's where it grew out of. And so anyway, that's what the book is sort of, and its origins and where it came from. And there's a lot else, but maybe I'll give you guys a chance to ask any questions or have any thoughts that you might have. Anything's on the table, as I say. So you could feel free to wander up to that microphone or just shout it out if you like, or you can leave. And feel free. Hi.
Hi, I'm Roxanne, lifelong fan.
Thanks.
I wanted to find out, or curious to know really, if you were able to find the meaning of life on your adventure in real life.
Yeah. Next. That was an allusion to a movie I did called St. Elmo's Fire, which was actually set in Georgetown in D.C., where I was a cub reporter and I wrote an article called The Meaning of Life. But I'll tell you, I've come closer to finding the meaning of life on the Camino than I have anywhere else, both times. You know, the first time when fear was sort of revealed to me, fear is a funny thing, and it doesn't ever go away, but once something has been sort of outed like that, it can never have the blind hold over us it once did. You know, so the second half of my life, I think, has been very much about walking away from fear, you know, and walking through fear. Whereas in the first half, I was just blindly reacting to fear without even knowing that was calling the shots so much in my life. And so that's been and it's also given me a secret superpower in a sense that I see so many people, as we all do, who are reacting out of fear without even knowing that's what they're doing. And when you've spent so much time sort of examining your own fears, I have, you can really identify it and see it in other people. And so there's something wonderful and sort of very liberating and very powerful to sort of go, oh, he's just operating out of total fear here. He doesn't even know it. And he's just flailing with fear. Okay, so I know how to address that. You know, so that's one of the things I learned profoundly on my first trip, which has been, and then on the second trip, I think I learned greatly to just shut up. You know, I had the ultimate luxury a parent has with an adult child, which was time. And I didn't need to solve his problems. I didn't need to fix anything. I just needed to walk beside him and give him space to sort of sort himself out. My son was, you know, like I said, just was getting over a breakup. And you sit my son down to have a chat, you don't get very far, but you get him moving. Eventually it all comes out. Every morning we would start walking and I would just say to myself, just don't talk. Just don't talk. And whether it took 5 minutes or a half hour or an hour and a half, suddenly Sam would go, well, and then she did, and off he would go. And it would take hours of him sort of vomiting out his process and me feeling lucky every step of the way that I got to be there for it and didn't have to say a damn thing. Because I'd had enough experience with the first Camino to know that it takes care of you. You just have to I just had to keep him going till the penny dropped and he didn't want to quit anymore, you know, and to just walk beside him and just, you know, ultimately he said at the end, he goes, well, I learned to trust you a lot more, Dad, because you just let me talk. And that was a huge thing for me. And I know when people say, is it carried on in your life after? And last week my son called me up and he said, and he still lives with us, we can't get rid of him, but he called me up and he said, hey, Dad, you got 7 minutes? I'm like, go. And, you know, it took a half hour, but just the idea that he just wanted to talk, work something through, and I just bounce it, be there to bounce, you know, that to me was that call wouldn't have happened before we went, you know? So that's been, meaning of life, I don't know, those were I don't know the whole meaning, but those were two pretty good things that I got out of it. Anyway, hi.
Hello. Thank you so much for doing this. We all appreciate this, and having just read half of your book at this point. I can say I definitely.
Only half?
Well, I'm a fast reader, but I actually just bought it like an hour and a half ago.
Oh, you're doing very well then. You're doing very well.
But so, as someone who is interested in traveling one day, walking the Camino, I was curious. So, for the first and second times that you walked, what would you say was the best piece of advice that someone had given you before your walks that you think this has definitely, improved my walk or made it better? And on your own, what would you say is a piece of advice you would give to someone that you think most people interested in the Camino don't know, but definitely should know before their pilgrimage?
I think there's no great mysteries. I just think the thing is to go. It's so hard, so easy not to go. I just think without thinking about it too much, you want to go, don't have to analyze it, go. You don't need to get in shape. You can walk yourself in shape, and it's just walking. You can stop many places along. You can have a short day, you can have a long day, you can do whatever you want. There's no structure, it's there. It's much less than, as in most of life, there's much less in the way and to be overcome than we think there is. It's right there in front of you. Just go. And always, people think they know the reason they're going to do this, going for this reason. And the Camino just tells you what it's going to be about for you. It's much bigger than you. There's something wondrous about being in a pilgrimage route. It's not like the Appalachian Trail where you've got your whole world on your back and you got to know a lot of stuff. Camino, you don't have to know anything. You're sleeping in beds every night. All these little churches that sprung up a day's walk from each other back in the day, they have little albergues, they call them, dormitories where pilgrims can stay for a few euro a night, or you can stay in nice little pensiones along the way. And you're sleeping inside. There's restaurants everywhere. You're always going to eat. So I just think going. And it's so easy. I read a line in a novel once. It said, without thinking about it too much, while you're young, and without thinking about it too much, see as much of the world as you possibly can. One day it will be too late. And I think if you have any desire to go through, you should just go. I don't have the time. Just go. If you have the time, you don't have a life. You know what I mean? A lot of people, on that note, a lot of people walk like 1 week at a time, or just do the last week, which is fine, and that's great. In fact, the vast majority just walk the last 100 miles or 100 kilometers, because then you can still get a thing called a Compostela, which is like a certificate saying, I walked the Camino, which, if you've walked the Camino, you're like, who cares? It means nothing, because the reward is like, it's an internal job, But many people just walk the last bit, and that's fine. And if that's all you can get the time for, people walk it over several years and come back. But I've always said to people, if you have the time or can fight for the time, walk the whole thing, because there's something in the sheer attrition of wearing down physically that just burns off all the resistance and all the nonsense that we, stuff that goes on in there in that little hamster wheel of our brains and hearts, that it just burns it off. And it's just like, there you are. And what's interesting about the Camino, that's happening to everybody who walks it. So it's a kind of a very safe space in a weird way. As we were arriving in Santiago this time, the goal is to make it to the cathedral. That's where the pilgrimage ends, and you get to this amazing, spectacular cathedral in Santiago, and it's a very emotional moment. And as we were pulling into Santiago, I realized, I got to go to the bathroom, and I want to go to the bathroom before I don't want to be at the cathedral going, oh my God, I got to go to the bathroom. So I stop at some little bar, a few hundred yards from the cathedral, a cafe. And I say, can I use your bathroom? And he says, no, you have to buy something. And I was like, you motherfucker. I've just walked for 500 miles across your damn country. Anyway, this is all in my head. And so I just take €2, plop it on the thing, and leave the Coke I ordered unopened there to show him my, feelings. And I was so frustrated and angry at this guy. And then when I walked out, I realized what a favor he did me. Because, and this stuff is what you kind of think on the Camino, you really get to the thoughts, under the thoughts, is that this was for me. There's no certificate. Who cares about a certificate? There's nothing. The wider world doesn't care. What I did has no value in the world. It was, walking across 500. Why? Why would you do that? Who cares? It has no meaning for anyone except for me. And that other people were going to reward my doing that. Why should they? And so to realize, and as I was walking away and my rage for him dissipated, I just realized that this is for me. I did this. I did this for me and for my son. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. And they shouldn't be giving me special dispensation because I walk this. My reward was in doing this. And, and what I'm taking away from that is so much more potent than anything anybody can give me on a certificate. In fact, we didn't even get our certificates this second time. So I forgot your question.
Oh, it's okay.
So I don't really think that it doesn't matter what you think you want to get or what advice you should. My advice is always about travel is just go. That's my advice about all travel. Just go. Paul Theroux's, books changed my life as well, and his advice was always go far, go alone, don't get out of touch, don't come back for a long time. And I think that's really true. I think that's the best gift we could give ourselves, particularly when we're young, So that's my bit of my soapbox, anyway.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
What?
No, I'm teasing.
Okay. So I've been to Santiago to Compostela, but not. I went by train. So, but I've been interested in walking the Camino, and you're saying all you do is show up, but I mean, you have to figure out where to start. Like what I've read about it is there's different routes. I was in Brussels, and there's like markers for the Camino through Brussels. It's like started. People came from all over. So
Well, it used to be back in the day, you would just walk out your house and walk to Spain.
So as somebody that can't just walk out of your house in northern Spain or France or whatever, how did you decide where to start?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And did you do the same route? Did you visit the same towns the second time that you walked with Sam?
I did do the same route. I walked up a thing called the Camino Francés, which is sort of the main route, if there is one. And it starts in the south of France, in a village called Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and it goes over the Pyrenees and then through Pamplona, and so it walks across the north. And there are other routes. There's a northern one. There's one up through Portugal. It goes further. The main, as it's come to be over the centuries, starting in Saint Jean is where the sort of main route starts. And there's tons of information online about it now. But I walked always the Camino Francés both times, which is, like I say, the most popular route. And so, I would, in all honesty, though, in about 15 minutes, it's what seems like a giant mystery, like, it becomes pretty clear. Like, oh, this is the main route. Or you can walk the north along the coast with more mountains and less people. Do I want to do that? Maybe I want to start in Portugal and go up that way. That's shorter. I'll do that. So, it's pretty, you can very quickly get up to speed on it. And when I say just go, it's just because that's more emotional in a certain way, that one doesn't need to do all sorts of stuff and get all sorts of, you don't need any equipment. You don't need to train for months. I mean, you can, I guess, and, but like if you're walking, and I've seen all shapes and sizes walking the Camino at all sorts of paces, I just think we often use all that rationalization to avoid and to give into fear. Yeah. So, yes, practically there are things that need to be learned, but not many. And like I said, in about 15 minutes, you type in Camino de Santiago route, you're on your way. And then you'll see a million videos of people with their selfies going, here I am on the Camino. And you're like, oh my God, next. And in a half hour, you're like, okay, I get it. Yeah. So.
Okay.
And I went to the same route twice because I was interested in sort of overlaying my experience onto my past experience to see to just sort of take a marker against myself and in time, And I was sure I remembered everything from my first Camino. It is indelible in my mind. And when I got there, I realized I remembered next to nothing of my first Camino. I remember emotional things that were there, and there were a few villages that were set in stone, but so much of the time I was like, I know I've been here, but I don't. And yes, buildings come and go, but there's like so much of it was like, wow, this is not what I remember at all. Mm-hmm. And it made me really realize how fallible my memory is, and how memory we concoct and construct a narrative through our lives through memory and selective recall of things to fit at the narrative that we want to fit, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And I realized that when I was walking, that I did anyway, that it's like, wow, this is, I don't recall this. Yeah. And so that was a liberation too. Besides, at first it was freaking me out. I'm like, what, was I here? And then it was just liberating, so. Okay. And if I did it again, I'd probably walk the same route again, which I would like to do it again. Yeah. I'd say it's the best thing I've ever done twice.
Cool.
So.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, you didn't leave. I thought you left.
No, I didn't leave. I would like to make a quick point with a quote from your book and then a question. I've read a lot of books about the Camino because I'm kind of obsessed about it. I've done the Camino a number of times. I've done different Caminos. And you got it. I really think you got it. You said something earlier which really touched me. You said, you want to be seen. I think you saw me. I felt as if you saw me. And I'd like to quote what I really liked about one of the many things. I kept underlining things where, anyway.
I'm so glad you didn't leave.
He said, this is about 3/4 away through the book. He said, we have been walking for several weeks now, and the routine of road life has become ingrained. Repetition has become a friend, something to be relied upon. It supports our efforts and pacifies thought. Perhaps the feeling of support that comes from being... It's really hard for me to get through this.
I know.
It is a part of a loose, ever-shifting, traveling community of walkers that creates this feeling of freedom. Or maybe it's that so much of the road is behind us, and yet we are not so close to the end that thoughts of life beyond the Camino are much more than an optimistic promise to carry the lessons learned here into the everyday world. So, my question is, can you say some more about what it has left you in your relationship with your son, and how is Sam doing? That's it.
Well, thank you. That was very generous. Thank you. And very moving. And there is... he's a plant. You know, the gifts of the Camino, I think, unfold really slowly and over years and years. It took me years the first time to realize so much of what I had learned. And because they emerge sort of at a walking level, at walking pace, and they're bone deep, marrow deep when they come up, right? And it's like, wow. Like, I could never, ever finish anything before I talk about this very early on in the book. At the beginning. Like, I just couldn't finish things, and I was afraid to finish it. And that's the way I went through life. And in the Camino, you get to, as you're walking, often when you're out amongst the weeds and the first thing you see in every village is the church spire, because that's the highest point. And you see that, and I would always go, oh my God, it's so far. Oh my God, this is awful. And then invariably it's closer than I thought, and I'm stronger than I thought, and I arrived there. And like I said in the book, I earned my way across the country. So I learned to be someone who finished strong and finished well, and I owned myself by the time I got to Spain. And that's what I wanted for my son, because I saw a fecklessness in my son, whether it was just age or whether it was me as a youth or whatever. And I wanted him to earn his way across the country and earn him into himself in a way that he had possession, that no one could take away that walk. You know, there's something, it's just a walk across the country for 500 miles, but there's something in it that is just so much more, right? That just goes, it's not just that. And I don't know what it is. And that's the thing about pilgrimage. It's not, that's what I was trying to, I got distracted earlier, but like not, millions of people have walked this over centuries, and it's like, as the yogis say, it's like it has good bhav. You know, when you go into a good yoga room, you just feel it. Like you walk into this big store and you go, oh yeah, it's a good bookstore. You know, and you just feel it. You start walking the Camino and you're like, yeah, this is, and everybody's doing the same thing. And so I just wanted to have myself when I finished. You know what I mean? And I just wanted my son to get an inkling of himself instead of all the whatever that's going on when you're an adolescent, you know, and as you're becoming a man, you're going out there, you have no clue what you're going into, right? You have no idea. But just as long as if you have yourself to hold on to, you have a fighting chance, you know. I don't know, that's what I wanted for him. And that's what I feel like I see from him. And I wanted us to have that, so that we have that us, not just parent-child, which he's outgrown and not going to tolerate anymore. So that's what I felt like has happened to some degree.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to say thank you.
I love this crowd.
Thank you for being a writer. Thank you for writing awesome books. And thank you for sharing your struggles in your 20s. I read both Brat and Longest Way Home about 18 months ago, when my 25-year-old son was facing some of the challenges that you faced in your 20s. And your books gave me a lot of hope They just gave me hope, and they helped me to see my son through. And I'm happy to say he's doing better. But I want to tell you thank you. And then I have a question. Writing is really hard. I write for a living. I know how difficult it is. So I want to know more about your process of writing. How do you motivate yourself? What motivates you? Is there a person? Is there a writer? You mentioned Joan Didion. Is it an experience? How do you get that, that motivation to write, and then what keeps you writing, and how do you hone your craft? I feel like your books keep getting better and better, and you become a better and better writer with every book. But how do you do that? How do you hone your skills?
I think that's all the Joan Didion that I know, actually. I just throw it out to be highbrow.
Okay.
So here's a long answer to your question, but so after my first Camino, I kept traveling. I thought, oh my God, this was an amazing experience that happened to me. I wanted to do more of that, so I kept traveling the world, and I kept traveling alone, far from home, doing my Paul Theroux imitation, far from home, alone, out of touch for a long time. And I was in Saigon, and I was walking down the street, and this kid pulled up next to me on his little Vespa or scooter, and he said, hop on, I'll give you a ride. I'm like, leave me alone. He's like, no, I'll give you a ride, hop on, leave me alone. And he wouldn't leave me alone, so I hopped on. And I drove all around Saigon with him that day. He showed me all over, like, where his Saigon, where his mother attended the public garden, where his father had been arrested, also just his world. And that night, he dropped me back at my hotel, and I was just buzzing. I was just like, wow, what a day. Amazing. And I had nothing. I was up in my room, and keep in mind, I've never written anything. I didn't write in school. I didn't read in school. I'd never read any of the books I was supposed to read in high school. I was a terrible student. I only got into college for acting by a fluke, and I got kicked out of college after 2 years. I was a terrible student. And so I'm buzzing around my room, don't know what to do, and I just sit down, I grab a piece of paper from the stationery, when hotels had stationery, and I just wrote down what happened that day. I was just so full of it, I just wrote it down. I'm an actor, right? I said so much bad dialogue. I know good dialogue when I hear it. I wrote down the good things he said, and I just wrote down a story of what happened. And I sat back, and I finished that one sheet of paper, and I went, oh, I feel like myself from the toes up. You could have drawn a direct line from that moment to the wheat field to when I was 15 years old. I felt exactly like me, exactly like the way I always wanted to feel. And so at that instant, I went, oh, another light bulb went off. That's interesting. Don't tell anybody. So I started writing, kept traveling. I started writing in little notepads, and I wrote stories. I couldn't keep journals because journaling I was terrible at. It's like, I'm so lonely, the food's so bad. I was like, I hate myself here, So I wrote stories of people I met and what happened and stuff, because I'm an actor, so I just knew story, like write a story. And so then I had no desire to do anything with that for years. For like 5, 6, 7, 8 years, I did nothing. And then I had no ambition to that until one day then I did. And then I met an editor of a magazine, and he took a chance on me. And, I said, you should let me write for your magazine. And he said, you're an actor, dude. And I said, yeah, but I can tell a story. That's what I do for a living. And he said, that's good. And I said, and if it doesn't work, you don't have to pay me. He said, that's better. Okay. So anyway, his name was Keith Bellows. I said it because he was here in Washington. He was at Nat Geo Travel, and he changed my life as well. He was a mentor to me, and I would be writing nothing without Keith. And so anyway, when I started writing, the first book I wrote, a friend of mine who's a novelist said, so how do you like the writing? In that way. I said, I love it. She goes, oh, you must not be very good. But I've always, I started travel writing because traveling made me feel like me from the toes up. Another thing I was reading was communicating that. They were selling destinations, and I knew intuitively, tell a story, don't sell a destination, And the other thing that made me successful right away was that underneath everything is like, travel can change you. It's changed my life. It'll change yours. I rarely ever wrote about that, but that was underneath it. And no one loved doing it more than I did. There was no one who loved travel writing more than I did. I just loved it. And so I just kept writing. And I'm a very introverted person by nature. And, it's odd because I've been outdoor, life like that with people. But to sit alone in a room is like, I'm really happy doing that.
Okay.
It may not be great for my temperament, really, to sit alone for too long, but, and I just think you just have to keep writing. You just have to write. I don't wait for, if you're acting, I often say to people, say you have 20 days of a movie. You have 2 days where you're like Marlon Brando. It's just like, oh my God, I'm just on fire here. No, don't touch me. Don't touch me. I'm too hot. Yeah, it's just amazing. And then there are 2 days when you just like, you can't even, you're awful. And then there are like 16 days where you just lay in brick and you just go to work and you do the thing. And writing I found to be kind of the same way. You just, some days are great, some days, otherwise you just, and I write in the morning because my brain becomes vegetable by the afternoon. And I used to be able to write anywhere. Like I'd take my kids to karate and I'd be in the bathroom typing away on, and I'd be writing anywhere. Now I've found I'm like, get out of the house, and I just need silence. But I used to write at the kitchen table. That E.B. White used to talk about writing at the kitchen table and having chaos go on around him. And I understood that for a long time, but I'm not so good at that anymore because my brain is getting harder to clarify. Or I'm getting more I like to think I'm getting more exacting, but I'm not sure. So anyway, I don't know if that answers anything.
It answered it. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much. I've only read your travel writings, and they're incredible. My question really about the Camino is my first exposure to it was Martin Sheen's movie. I can't remember the name of
The
it.
Way.
Which was fantastic. So was there a religious element to your hike? Did you do it because of religion or lapse of religion, or what was your experience
Yeah, good question.
with that?
As I mentioned earlier, the Camino is originally Catholic and still is a Catholic pilgrimage. For me, I was raised Catholic. I have not darkened a church door in decades. And I have very strong feelings about the Catholic Church at this point, and their abuses that I find staggering, and they should all be in jail. But anyway, I get off that soapbox. But so I did not walk for a religious reason in either time, although I would say I did go into a lot of the churches, which are amazing. These little 10th century Romanesque churches, and along the way are amazing. I do think something quite profound and deeply spiritual happens to anyone who walks the Camino, but I think that has nothing to do with religion, per se. If you wear through the gods of religion, that's great and fine, and there's a lot for you. And I loved a lot of the Catholic history along the way. It's fantastic. It's bloody and gory and full of, it's great. But I didn't walk it for a religious, active reason, no.
Okay, great, thanks.
Actually, following up on that, you mentioned earlier your buddy in the Rat Pack was Emilio Estevez.
Yeah.
And he did The Way.
He did The Way, yeah.
Did you guys talk, or did that
Not until,
influence one another? Or?
I hadn't seen Emilio for 30 years until I saw him just recently. After that movie or after the stuff I was telling you about the Brat Pack, after I wrote that book, I decided to go make a documentary about the Brat Pack, because I've realized I know what I feel about it, but I never talked to anybody else and found out what they feel about it. And one of the ironies of the Brat Pack was the minute it happened, it ended it, because suddenly nobody wanted to be in an ensemble movie with these other people again. So that ended these friendships, and then because everyone was so young and insecure that. So that was one of the paradoxes of it. But so I hadn't talked to Emilio in 30 odd years till I went to make this documentary, and we did talk about the Camino a bit and how amazing it was. But that was after his movie. I think it's a wonderful movie.
Unrelated.
Yeah, we didn't talk about it before at all.
Okay, thank you.
It just was re-released, I believe, the movie. Yeah, it's a terrific movie if you haven't seen it. It's called The Way. I think he has a sequel in mind he's starting to do. I think maybe he walks back. I'm not sure. Hi.
Hi, so great to see you here. I'm so glad I didn't wear my pink prom dress from high school. I don't think it fits anymore, but I would have been a little overdressed. But anyways, I'm so curious. You mentioned that your son, Sam, didn't mind you writing the book, but when you were writing, did he ever ask to read it, or has he read it? And then also, he's clearly started to carve out his own path in acting and just anything that you're comfortable sharing in terms of how you see him following your footsteps, literally, versus him, striking out and trying to, separate himself from the Brat Pack, so to speak.
Well, my son, yeah, he's an actor. He's on a show called Dead to Me, I guess his most popular thing on Netflix. And I always said I never wanted my kids to be actors, of course, because, but God is funny, right? But I thought, acting saved my life at 15. Who am I to say, So if it's something that he's found, and my daughter's also, she's been on Broadway a number of times, and I'm like, oh my God, how did this happen to me? And so, I think it's just a family business, as it were. So it's not it just sort of seems kind of, it's what we talk about. It's what we talk about actors, movies, stuff, and it's just sort of, it's been around. When I mentioned this in the book, when I was, when my son was about 8 or 9, we were on a road trip across in the West, and everybody else was napping, and so I took Sam out, who was hungry, so we went to a diner in Lander, Wyoming, and I never told my kids at all about my youthful success. They knew I was an actor and whatever. I'd been to movies before they were born, whatever. But I kept it all very down from them, and wasn't really part of our world. And so we're in this diner, Sam and I, and this waitress comes over to take our order, and she looks at me. You're in Mannequin. Yeah. Bob, it's the guy from Mannequin. And anyway, so the cook comes out. And anyway, so I end up taking pictures and signing autographs. And she was very sweet and all, but I was absolutely trapped. And I was with my son. And I was like, and she was lovely. And finally she leaves. And I turn to my son and I say, Sammy, how was that for you, kiddo? And he said, oh, Dad, I was so proud. Aww. And I realized in that instant I had done everything wrong in keeping such a massive part of who I was and my experience away from my, not secret, but away from my kids. And at that instant I realized everything is just fair game and it's all on the table now. They can know all about my alcoholism, my drinking, my drugs, whatever they wanted. This is who I am. And so my son is sort of following that kind of thing, great. I mean, it's a wondrous life. It's given me a wonderful, wonderful life. And he's probably temperamentally suited for it a little more than I was and am, whereas I'm much more, he doesn't seem to have that undercurrent of fear that we were talking about. So that, it's just he doesn't have that to carry around or contend with in himself. I'm sure he has other things, but that's not one of them. So, yeah, I mean, go for it, Sammy. If that's your thing, Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. We're waiting for you. There you are. Hi.
I did bring pink.
That's
so
fuchsia.
She had some fuchsia. Remember, it was several dresses put together. Okay.
You got me there. You got me. You've probably seen it more recently.
I've seen it more recently than you. I was listening to the music on the way here, actually.
The music's great.
And music's great. The music, if you listen to it again, if you haven't in a while, you're like, wait a minute, I forgot this. It's very unique, especially the weirder stuff. So please tell us about Molly. She's doing some very cool things. Just kidding. So I really did want him to answer that, but since you all groaned, I won't. What's your next trip going to be? What do you want to write about next? And I saw that one of your kids said, how come you didn't take me on that trip? So how is the other kid responding?
My 9-year-old read a few pages of the book, and he said he made like a paragraph of the book, and he said, he's 9, and he said, this would have been a lot better book if it was about me.
Okay, right.
So he said he wanted to walk the Camino. I said, sure, absolutely, but he better hurry up because I'm aging out of it a bit. But and my daughter, she just would like to go to Paris. So, but Molly, I owe Molly my career in a sense that I had just made this movie that we've talked about earlier called St. Elmo's Fire, and it had not come out yet, and so there's no time you're hotter than when no one has seen anything you've done. And so, but there was buzz that this was, the mini Big Chill or something. So, so they gave me, and the part they were casting was for Molly's boyfriend, the part I ended up doing, which was like the football star, square-shouldered, broad-shouldered, square-jawed, hunk. And I was not this. And so they said, no, he's not right for this. We're looking for, a football star. But we'll give him a courtesy audition because we hear this movie's got some buzz. So they gave me a sort of a pity audition, and I went in, and Molly was in the room, which is very rare that actresses would be in the audition room. So Molly was there, and she read the scene with me. So I sat down, and I read my scene, and John Hughes was in the back, and Howie Deutsch, the director, was there as well, and they had video camera, and I read the scene once, and they went, thank you. I was like, fuck these people, and walked out. But as I walked out, apparently Molly turned to John and said, that's the guy. And John Hughes said, that wimp? And she said, yeah, he's dreamy. That's who I would fall for, someone like that, not some jock. And so John, to his credit, said, I don't see it, but okay. And John, he listened to young people. It's not just lip service. He honored young people. He said, this is your movie. I wrote it for you. You think that's the guy. And to his credit, he even got, once he decided to cast me, he was behind me the whole way. And it was great. And I should say one last Pretty in Pink story is that it's a reshoot of the end is a reshoot, of course, which I guess a lot of you know now who like that movie. It originally ended where, if you haven't seen the movie, I'm not going to bore you by telling you, but it's a love triangle. What she wants me, I'm the ideal guy, and she has a best friend. And so she ends up, I dump her through peer pressure, but so she goes to the prom. She said the whole movie's about going to a dance. So, which I thought at the time, like, really? But anyhow, so she goes to the prom with John, and the audience, they do test screening. The audience is loving this movie. They're loving it. And they get to the point where I dump her. She goes to the prom with John Cryer, and they hate it. And they boo, and they boo, and they hate this movie suddenly. And so John Hughes, being the smart businessman, goes, oh, my God. Rewrite. She goes with Blaine. And so suddenly there's movie where I go to the prom with her, and I show up at the prom and tell her I love her and all that. But I was doing a play in New York at the time, so I had my head shaved because I was playing a Marine in this play. And so they made me a wig. And I always say if they'd known we'd still be talking about it 35 years later, they would have paid for a better wig. Because it was just this terrible wig that sat on my head like this sort of bird's nest.
I have to go rewatch
and so
it
if you were to
now.
watch the movie again, you see when I come up to Molly at the prom and I go, I love you so much. It's bad wig acting. The wig makes me look so forlorn and sad and just like, oh my God, this guy is just suffering so badly. Look at him, he looks terrible. And his hair, it's just, so this bad, so the wig did all the work for me, so the wig was a blessing. And then later when we're outside, kissing in front of the car and OMD's playing that iconic song now. And remember one take, Molly reaches up, puts her hand on my hair, my wig falls off. No, not the hair. So those are my Molly Ringwald stories, okay? We've done that now, okay.
Thank you for that.
Thanks. All right, I guess we'll do one more then, and then give me the hook. Hi.
Hi, how are you? So I have a 17-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old daughter. And, whenever we travel together, which we do often, and I have taken them on separate trips, it's all good until it's not.
Yeah.
And then, there's those moments of you're mad at one another, nobody's talking, it's kind of, did you ever at any point think, oh, dear God, what have I done? Like, we have 300 miles to go? And
Every day.
Were those...
Every day.
Okay, so I'm not the only one. So you had, ups and downs, and how did conversation evolve? Like, did you
Why
just
don't you
let
walk
it
ahead,
evolve?
Sam? Well, he's 19. That means he wants to get up the crack of noon. I'm now 60. Can we talk about that for a minute? And he... that means I'm up at dawn. So we are already at odds, and so we had constant fights. Much of the time. But it was interesting because one time he wanted me to. It's in the book I talk about. He gives me his earbud and wants me to listen to some rap music, and I hate rap. Right, so I listen to this. I endure this thing till it's almost. And I go here, and he gets furious. And it's 100 degrees out. We haven't eaten. We've got 10 miles left. It's a bad moment anyway. And he goes, Dad, and he's. Says things he shouldn't say to me, and he storms off. And I'm enraged at him. And because I'm right, he can't speak to me like that. And I indulge him, listen to that crap, and blah, blah, blah. And then as I'm walking, this is what the Camino does. I, of course, put on then the Eagles' greatest hits, right? The ultimate old white guy music, right? So I'm listening to my Eagle, take it easy. And and then it kind of dawns on me, yeah, he was wrong in saying you can't say F you to your dad, you can't do all this. But, I was utterly intolerant, I was judgmental, I was dismissive. And in life, most of the time in my daily life, I would just sort of leave it on him. That you can't talk like that to me, Sam, okay? I'm sorry I don't like your music, but you cannot speak to me like that. When the fact is, I was half to blame with it too. My intolerance, my judgment, and to kind of own that. So by the time we ran into each other 3 hours later, sweating, both of them, he just went, sorry, Dad. I'm like, I'm sorry, Sam. And we met, and that's what the deal was there, So, but yes, we got in fights. What's interesting, I'm much more sort of sensitive to that kind of stuff. Whereas Sam, I said, Sam, we probably had a fight every day, didn't we, kiddo? And he goes, What are you talking about? We fought twice. And that's how he sees it. You know, he's much less sort of that way. He rolls with things much more than I do. So, but mostly I have to say it's always, if I'm having problems with I'm like my kids. I either need a nap or a snack. You know what I mean?
Sounds about right. Yeah.
You know?
Sounds about right.
And on that,
Thank you.
enlightening note, thanks for coming out, guys.